maybe we can first start with CTE, if you could kind of tell us what those letters mean and what this diagnosis is.
Sure. CTE, which is, been in the news a lot lately, especially if you are a person who follows the NFL, but it's not only indicative of the NFL players. However, that's how we've been in the public eye in the last 6 to 8 months to a year. We've been made more aware of it. CTE stands for Chronic Traumatic Encephalopathy. Those are very big words, very, big, giant scientific words, which also just translate to cognitive decline due to repeated head trauma based on sports-related activity. For example, Tammy, here in the Carolinas, I have one client who is 62 years old, who is a 13-year veteran of the NFL, and he played during the eras of the 60s and the 70s when they were told and coached and pretty much it was the rule of the land to lead with your head. And so their helmets were used as battering rams, if you will. However, I also have a doctor here in the Carolinas where I work who is she and I are working together, and she's starting to see mixed martial artist people who have no protection and who are getting older. And when we say older in that world, they could be 35, but they've been doing that for quite a while, and now they're suffering from repeated head trauma that has gone undiagnosed and untreated, and therefore it's causing cognitive decline. We are also seeing, again, I have another person in my world who is a former NHL hockey player who played for years and years, highly successful hockey player, again, also showing signs at a very young age, under 50 years old, cognitive decline, and again, they're still working with him, but again, we are believing that it is because of his sport and what he did, and that he, unfortunately, probably suffered significant blows to the head that during the time they were happening went undiagnosed and untreated, and therefore they kept playing through it. They rubbed a little salt in it, spit on it, and went back out on the field or on the ice. And those are behavior patterns that unfortunately are causing these gentlemen, which most of these people are gentlemen because that's just the way who is in the sport, they're causing these gentlemen significant cognitive decline now that they're retired and out of their sport.
So, Ellen, maybe you can help me to understand this a little bit better. So, this has definitely come to light because we're seeing much more in the news because of these athletes. So what are the symptoms that they see in regards to this type of dementia? Is it different than Alzheimer's? Is it different than some of the other dementias?
Well, I can speak from my personal experience with my amazing relationship with two of the NFL football players that I have talked to, I've mentioned already. And let me focus on my 62-year-old. He is a champion. I choose not to share his name right now, even though he's completely out and he is talking very openly about his diagnosis. But I have not been given permission by him in this particular conversation to talk about him. But in my relationship with him, which is great and it's grand, he talks about how originally his sleep patterns were very impacted, in incredible insomnia, couldn't shut his brain down, and not like shutting our brain down like, oh my gosh, I have so many things to do tomorrow, I can't sleep through the night, I'm menopausal and I can't shut my brain down. Some people have that. That's not to be confused with this. This is debilitating. He describes debilitating inability to sleep for more than a day, more than multiple days. So his sleep patterns, even shortly after his retirement from the NFL, these were some of the things that he started to notice first. So when you have lack of sleep, but you're this incredibly robust, muscle-bound warrior who's used to operating at a very, very high intensity level from a physicality perspective. So this is why it becomes scary, or it can become scary in a professional setting. And when I work with my professional providers, I try to educate them like, listen, we are on the cusp of having Grandma Mabel, who's 89 years old, who's just happy to be here and has Alzheimer's, and she's in a wheelchair, and we, in the same living environment, if people are going to professional settings, with a 62-year-old former NFL player whose family cannot take care of him anymore, and he's now under the same roof as Mabel, who's 87 and just, very lovely and comfortable and loves to sing Christian hymns. These are two very diabolically different people with cognitive decline. However, they both need our help, which again is why it's crucial that for sure my professionals understand how it will look and feel very different between former NFL football player who needs our help and Aunt Mabel who needs our help. So those are again the sleep disturbances from my perspective. The other thing is some significant depression was also identified by my gentleman with CTE. Probably, and that could be for a variety of reasons. Depression because he's a warrior. This particular person was is a Hall of Famer. He's used to operating at a very, very high intensity level, and now as his memory is becoming a little foggy, he becomes more disengaged from society because he can't participate on the highest level that he was used to. And so now depression starts to set in. And unfortunately, Tammy, when depression sets in anybody, but for sure someone with a CTE diagnosis, and they withdraw, they start to isolate themselves, the cognitive decline increases.
Right.
So the situation gets worse. The more that they are aware of their decline and the more they pull back, unfortunately, in way too many cases with CTE, especially with our friends from NFL players, they start to self-medicate. They start to use prescription medications unchecked. They start to use alcohol as a relaxant, which I suppose any of us would if we're starting to feel like we're having problems, but these are very, very scary conditions that create a perfect storm for even more cognitive decline. So that's why it's so crucial for these big warriors of these gridiron greats, if you will, as they start to feel these, they're suffering in silence right now because nobody wants to talk about it, and that's a very scary condition and a very perfect storm for problems for these gentlemen who are suffering in silence when there is so many things we can do to intervene with them and to give them help and to give them hope.
What are the interventions for someone with CTE? What are they? Do we know what they are? Are we still kind of forming what the interventions are for someone like this?
Well, I do believe as a society we're probably still trying to formulate that. Part of the problem from my perspective is that these gentlemen, God love them, tend to stay in the shadows for far too long. And once they are years, again, they might notice, let's just say they notice it today, but instead of seeking help, they retreat. Oftentimes, depending on the situation, in the gentleman that I know personally, he has a very, very actively involved wife. He has a very actively engaged family and support system. He is thriving. But he's 3 years into his CTE diagnosis, but what he credits it to is that he remains very physically active. He has a gym. Thankfully, he has the ability to have a workout equipment at his home. He also he's a religious man who goes to church every day. He's very open about that, how his faith and being engaged with his spirituality has helped him. He is not isolated. He talks about his situation. He meets other people. He mentors other people. So he has been a person that 3 years into his CTE diagnosis is literally thriving. Now, this conversation might be lost on him a little bit because we've gone on for a while, but I speak to him frequently, and he's very capable of keeping up with, direct conversations and direct questions. Subsequently, he shares stories with me about gentlemen from his same era, so they would be in their early 60 years old, who don't have family support, who are self-medicating with both pharmacological interventions and alcohol. They don't get out of the house. They don't interact with anybody, and they are significantly more quickly declining than he is. And it's breaking his heart because he played with them, but because of their lack of support and their lack of socialization and their lack of remaining involved in the communities that they live in, they are withering away, and it doesn't need to be that way.